It really makes me happy to say that in today's world, I see that there are two tracks for each role, which is great. There is a dedicated individual contributor progression track, and then there's a dedicated management and leadership track. Each track has its own merits and kind of pain points. There is no right or wrong choice. So just that is great to know. And I bring this up because of a very traditional thinking that each path would lead to some manager role, but that is not the case anymore.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of our Hatchpad Insight interview with Anand Safi. I'm Tim Winkler, the creator of Hatchpad, the community for startup technologists. If this is your first time here, don't forget to hit subscribe on new insight interviews like this one. This is part 2 of a 2-part series of discussions with Anand Safi, a startup engineering leader, mentor, and advisor with over 10 years of product development experience. Thanks again for hanging out with us here at the Hatchpad, Anand.
Happy to be back again, Tim, and speak a little bit more on what we started in the first one.
Sounds great. So as a recap, in part 1, we defined the different career paths within software development and kind of broke those down into 3 major tracks: web development, data, and support roles. So part 2, we're going to be discussing some of the traits that tend to align with these different paths. Essentially, almost take a product management approach to persona mapping these skill sets. We'll also then paint a picture of what a day in the life might look like for these roles and define some of those career growth tracks that someone could expect when growing their career in these paths. So why don't we kick things off with some of those traits that tend to align with software developers, web development? What are some of those things that you think stand out?
Yeah, thanks, Tim, for that introduction and recap. So to kick things off, we'll talk about high-level traits for each of the disciplines. We have 4 disciplines in total around software engineering, data-related roles, support-related roles, and then anything to do with quality, like QA-centric roles. So I think there's a lot of overlap in terms of the key traits required. First, I think is just being patient. Any discipline you start with is not going to be an overnight thing you pick up. It's going to be incremental development. One key thing is being patient with any IT role and just pacing out kind of your focus areas. A mistake people often make, and I personally made, was to spread too thin or just try to pick on many things at once. So even within software engineering, we talked last time about front end, back end, full stack, different kind of things. And I wanted to learn as much as I can because I was in that development phase or learning phase. But I would say pick your battles, stick to your focus areas, and get really good at one core area, along with keeping up with others. So patience is the first trait. To talk about some specifically to software engineering, I would say curiosity is another high-level personality trait that is important because oftentimes it can feel that you're, from an engineering standpoint, you have been given the requirements or the user story from a product sense. You have been given the designs if you have a UX and design practice, and you simply need to implement that. But I would say that if you're curious of understanding the why or what we are trying to solve as a business, it can mean a lot different in terms of what your end implementation might look like. So we always talk about having a customer mindset, trying to think from a user perspective. So it's not simply about writing code or implementing the feature. It's trying to really implement a workflow or a typical user journey when somebody might be using your system out there. And that is why the curiosity around what the work is being proposed. Is it technically feasible? Is there alternate ways to approach it? What are some high-level considerations or edge cases you need to think of is important. And then the third and final thing about software engineering specifically would be being calm under chaos. And that is related to when you start putting code out in production, there will be bugs, there might be issues. You might be that perfect engineer, perfect developer. We are human end of the day. Something might come up, something might trigger a complex workflow that leads to an issue, and you will need to do what they call traditionally firefighting, dealing with a war room situation, a P1 incident, any of these things, whatever the terminology is in your company or team. But just be calm, don't give in under pressure, because that is kind of when we end up making the not so great decisions or hasty decisions. So trying to approach in a calm manner would really help. Moving on to Data related roles, I think the two more important ones are analytical skills and questioning attitude. That is pretty self explanatory when you talk about data related roles, because you need to read between the lines in terms of you have all of these different metrics being collected, but what does this tell at a high level, or just how can you weave a story out of these different metrics that are being collected? One classic thing is what they call funnel reporting. Say 100 users started my app, 50 users clicked on add a product to the cart, 25 clicked the checkout button, and then only 10 placed the order. So you need to weave a story that, okay, we have only 10% of users trying to come on the app for shopping, placing orders. So you need to analyze independent metrics being collected. So analytical skills are super important. And then a questioning attitude, it might sound a loose term when I put it literally, but just trying to have a natural skill set around what are some business level questions that I can still answer. So the example that I gave, the questions would be how much revenue we are losing on the table, or how much is an average session time that the user is spending, what pages are they looking at, is there a particular page view, or is there a particular screen that is causing the maximum drop rate or bounce rate for users? So you need to approach any given metric presented to you from different angles. Moving on to the support roles, I think those are the most customer facing roles, as we all know and understand. The single trait here is communication, just being able to champion advocacy and communication both ways. First, representing your team and company and the work being done, and being able to communicate or attend to a customer pain point or a question. And then at the same time, anything that the customer presents to you, being able to take it back to the right team, or just being able to triage or just look into, okay, what possibly might be an issue. So say a customer reaches to you that this is an issue, you should be able to communicate with the customer to get the right level of information. So then you can apply your critical thinking and say, okay, probably this sounds like a configuration thing, or this is the way it is from a feature perspective. It's just the implementation is by design, or this is a bug and I need to sync up with engineering. So just trying to work with the customer and communicating is important in that sense. The last one is around QA. And I would say we touched a little bit on this in the software engineering track, that is the user perspective. Super important for the QA team. They are also closest before a thing goes out to the customer. But I think the most important thing is outside the box thinking as a key trait, because a lot of people in each discipline will simply focus on the happy path. Even an engineer, okay, this is the requirement. I have made it work. See, my code satisfies that functional requirement. That's done. But as a QA, it is your outside the box thinking to weave up some complex workflow or a situation or a thing that could break that, or some weird configuration or combination of things that will lead to that weird state that the happy path implementation is not addressing. So to wrap that whole skills and trade section, I would say outside the box thinking maybe applies in all sense to some roles, but I think for QA, it is the most important one actually.
To build on what you mentioned, the having the customer centric mentality or the mindset is something that we hear more and more from a lot of startups. And if you look at the role of, say, a product manager, a bulk of those individuals usually came from a technical background, either a software engineer or an analyst. It's very interesting to see how engineers are going to be much more effective over the span of their careers if they're building with the customer in mind. I just think that's such a fascinating transition. I think it's happening more and more, and I love to see it. So why don't we jump into the next section of this discussion, which is a day in the life of. So obviously keeping this as brief as possible, but providing a bird's eye view of what someone would expect coming into a developer seat.
Yeah, so I think again, just I'll start in the same sense of what is the common theme for all these day in lives for either a software engineer, a data analyst or engineer, somebody in data science or QA or support. So I would say there is definitely the common theme is your team rituals. And by that, there could be a team stand-up that's happening. There could be a sprint related meeting that is either grooming the backlog or trying to plan your sprint. There could be a retrospective. So I'm just approaching this assuming that most teams nowadays would be agile in some sense. So that's why for these agile teams, the day in the life would 50% be trying to kind of work against your team agile kind of goals, and then also take participation in these meetings. So I would say meetings and then agile kind of ritual or delivery is common for all of these roles. A software engineer, what that means for them, it could be that their day in the life related to agile rituals is implementing new features, or trying to maintain an existing code, or trying to put a bug fix or pair program with someone, or just refactor part of code. So there would be their specific outlook on doing kind of their role for agile rituals. Actually, for a data analyst, that could simply be that you again have a story related to trying to analyze a requirement or pull some metrics or write SQL queries or architect kind of new queries to answer those top level questions that we said that the business might have, or you're curious as a team, or in terms of any tooling that you might need to do actually. For a data engineer and data science, there's always work around modeling, so statistical modeling, or trying to review the results from your previous modeling efforts and fine tune the models. So what the theme that I'm getting at is a lot of individual contributor work related to your specific role. So for an engineer, it is related to software development. For a data analyst, it is related to writing queries and generating reports. For data engineer or data science, it is related to modeling a prediction and evaluating results. For a QA engineer, it would basically be trying to architect test plan and test cases for the development work that was just completed. For a support person, it would be just continuing to work with a customer in terms of ongoing issues, or in terms of new integration rollouts or feature rollouts. So that is just a half of the day, or probably even more than half, is a mix of agile rituals and then work related to those. That is your team's focus area. The other half could be around just things that naturally come up, or just recurring things. For example, we have 20% of time for people to just work on things they like to do. So it's learning a new skill, trying to explore a new library, or trying to just jam with the team in terms of exploring kind of new technology. We have even teams, simply we call it Friday videos and beer. And then each Friday afternoon, we simply get together for an hour and watch some learning video, or just picking up a new skill, or seeing some talk actually from a previous conference. So it's focused around learning and development, plus reserve time around things that might come up. So there is questions, there is slack time, just breaks in between. You might be pulled into something ad hoc. So I would say typically in a day, if you say 8-hour day, it's probably 4 to 5 hours of solid contribution, heads down, focus IC time. And the other time is spent around conversing, communication, collaboration, dealing with things that come up, and then a little bit of learning and development, along with some breaks in between.
That's fantastic. I think that kind of paints a good picture. Let's dive into the last piece of the conversation here. This one is going to be more specific to career growth and what you might anticipate being in these different seats in terms of how you excel in your career, from an individual contributor up to a leadership role. There's all sorts of different paths that folks can take. What are some of the common paths that you see? We can start with the software development track.
Yeah, so I think to start things off, I think it really makes me happy to say that in today's world, I see that there are 2 tracks for each role, which is great. There is a dedicated individual contributor progression track, and then there's a dedicated management and leadership track. Each track has its own merits and kind of pain points. There is no right or wrong choice. So just that is great to know. And I bring this up because there's a very traditional thinking that each path would lead to some manager role for any kind of role that we speak or discipline we speak, but that is not the case anymore. So that is great to know. Starting with software development, you basically would start with a junior engineer, either in the front end, back end, or full stack. You might also start as an intern, probably, just to gain some experience. You will typically spend, I would say, 1 to 3 years in that junior to mid-level role before becoming a mid-level engineer. There's no title for a mid-level engineer in terms of, there are some companies who might say you're a junior software engineer, a software engineer, and then a senior, or there are some companies who might simply say you're a software engineer or a senior engineer. or to the extent as we do is we put individual contributor levels. So that is just another kind of deeper funnel that people exactly know that how are they tracking towards the next progression. So we would have software engineer individual contributor level 2, level 3, level 4. And you know that, okay, when you are about to go to level 4, that means that your title is now going to be a senior software engineer. So that is just ways around representing those things. But typically in probably 3 to 5 years from junior to mid overall, you will move into senior software engineer actually. And I would say at this point, you probably would continue to be in this role. And naturally, the next step is to become a tech lead. So, which basically means that you are doing some sort of architectural decision, some sort of communication and collaboration, representing your team's technical stack and being able to speak about the decision and choices with your close collaborative stakeholders. This tech lead point is a critical juncture where you could continue on the individual contributor track, or you could go into the management and leadership track. Titles going forward would be somebody is either a tech lead or an engineering manager one, like a newer engineering manager. Somebody then becomes a staff engineer and then on this parallel track might become a senior EM slash director. Then somebody could become a principal engineer, which is the highest or probably the second highest principal engineer in the IC track. And you would be on the other side, continue to be a director with different incentivization or become a VP actually. And then the highest one I've only seen a couple of people till now is called a fellow. Fellow is the highest possible title in an IC track. And then on the flip side, that would basically mean you're a head of engineer or kind of the C-level, C-suite person for that leadership track in the sense actually. That is for software development. For data, it is a little more simple in the sense you either start as a data analyst, engineer, or data scientist. You become the senior data engineer, analyst, or scientist, and then you become a lead engineer or just ahead of that actually. So there's not a totally separate path, but you could apply a lot of that if their companies have that separate path. For support, I would say I'm a little less familiar on how those roles might come up, but I'm assuming it's the same level of kind of IC role and progression. For QA, it's a little interesting, and I wanted to keep it at last because you could start as a QA and a quality engineer, a quality analyst, or an automation engineer. You could do a little bit of that, and then the critical juncture comes where we see many quality engineering folks become interested in software development. So probably from that point, people do become either software engineers or continue to become senior automation engineers or QA leads or managers for their own disciplines. So either they keep their focus 100% on quality, otherwise they take all the learnings and necessary skills from a quality standpoint and then dive into the engineering career ladders to become an individual engineering contributor and then carry forward in their software development career ladder.
Yeah, that's a fantastic breakdown. I did have a question in regards to you break down engineering manager, director, VP, C-suite, or head of engineering. Do you oftentimes see that there's more folks underneath you from a resource perspective when you're in different stages, or do they then have more of an umbrella effect where they have multiple engineering managers underneath them? And so I'm trying to get to the bottom of how many folks becomes too many to personally be in charge of from a resource manager perspective.
Yeah, that is excellent. This is directly my role and expertise for the past couple of years. I'm glad you asked that. So in the engineering management and leadership track, I would say typically you first start as an engineering manager where you're directly managing teams' projects and have direct reports who are simply individual contributors. So the classic term is manager of ICs actually. For example, our teams, we tend to keep it at 6 reports. Not that if you already have 6 reports, you will end up becoming a senior manager. It's just simply that is a right fit. Like, okay, somewhere between 6 to 8 reports is reasonable for a people manager to give the necessary time and support in terms of mentorship, coaching, career development for each of their reports actually. And then they can continue to lead still at the same time, driving a couple of key initiatives or projects. So it's typically 1 or 2 teams, 1 to 3 projects, and then 6 to 8 reports for the first, I would say, 3 years or even 5 years of your engineering management journey. From there, you could move into a senior EM/director role, which basically is that you could potentially now become a manager of managers. So you might be responsible for a couple of core initiatives, but you're not directly overseeing a particular project or team. You are working with the engineering managers, or how we call frontline managers, and supporting them in terms of higher level guidance and resourcing and just overall engineering organization strategy needs, where the frontline managers can drive the work forward. So in that director level role, you are a manager of managers ideally, and would have, again, the number of reports could stay the same. That is 6 to 8, like you have 3 to 4 managers, and then the really high principal staff engineers that could end up being your direct reports. But your time is split 50-50. 50% you work with your frontline managers to support their initiatives and team projects, and 50% you work with kind of your own leadership or the people you're reporting to, that is the VP of engineering or the CTO, to drive higher level hiring, operational cost, strategy focus areas, or long-term bets, or where we want to steer the organization and culture, and driving a lot of those initiatives forward actually. So that is the director level manager of managers. And then that is probably synonymous with VP, where you have directors reporting to you, and then the CTO, the C-level person, would definitely have only 2 or 3 VPs reporting to them, because they are a lot more focused with other kind of board level objectives and overall company vision and mission, and work a little bit more externally as well with other vendors, or just trying to answer any technical questions that come up at the highest level.